So now that we have a working enemy health system, let's translate that into something that we can read through a heads-up display while we're playing our game. So currently we have the situation where our bad guy is sitting in an idle state. When it gets hit with a cannonball, it transitions to the take damage state. The take damage state is subtracting from the health float variable. And if that health float variable drops below zero, or is equal to zero, it fires off this is dead state. So what we can do is we can create an object, like a health bar object. We'll take a cube and we'll have that sitting on top of our bad guy, and we'll scale that based on our current health value. So we could build a little mechanism in here, the little formula that translates our current health to an appropriate scale. So in order to get this started, what I'll do is I'll just create a game object. I'll start with a cube, and this cube is going to be my health bar. So I'll just set up the basic size and the scale. I'll set the X to 3. I'll set the Y to something like 0.2, and then the Z, maybe I'll try 0.1. Let's see how that looks. Let's take a look at this. So I'll just zoom in here a little bit, and that feels a little thick. So I'll take that Z value down just a little bit more. So maybe 0.05, and I'm not so concerned about the position relative to the bad guy cube just yet. I'm going to fix that in just a few minutes. So let me organize my hierarchy. And so I'll call this, this will be my health bar. And it's eventually going to be a child of the bad guy. But before I make it a bad guy, I want to throw this in an empty game object, because currently I want to use this as a health bar, right? So I want to scale this down based on relative to the value of health. So as I mentioned before, I'll create a little formula that causes this to scale. And so at 100%, this scale is going to be as wide as the cube. And as that scale goes down, it'll represent the health. But the glitch that I have right now is that when I scale this cube, it scales towards its center pivot point. And we can correct for that by throwing it into an empty game object. So I'll go to Game Objects, Create Empty. And this empty game object that I'm creating, this is going to be the health bar. I'll call this the health bar manager. So I have health bar and health bar manager. And I'll just take the health bar and I'm going to zero out its coordinates for now. I'll just reset that to 0. And I'll throw my health bar into the health bar manager. And I'll just make sure that's set to 0. That looks good. I'll look at the actual health bar inside, and I'll reset that to 0. Actually, let me undo that. I didn't want to reset the scale. The only thing I wanted to reset for now was the position, and everything disappears, and that's just fine because it probably centered it in the center. It's at 0, 0, 0 in the center of my world. My bad guy currently is not at 0, 0, 0. But I'll correct for that in just a minute. Once I throw the health manager into the bad guy, I'll take that current position and I'll reset its position as well. And what that does is that centers it into the position of the bad guy. So the only thing left for me to do now is I want to tinker with the ability to scale this. And currently, if I take the health bar manager and I scale this, and I'll just scale that down, you can see that I run into the same issue. There's a couple of things that I want to point out here. The first thing is that if I take my health bar and I move that according to its local position, so I'll just kind of move this over, and I'll go back to my health bar, you can see that now that health bar is more or less registered, the health bar manager did not move, just the health bar. So that was making sure that we're not moving according to global, but we check our axis and make sure that it's local, and we'll move that over just a bit. And shout out to a couple of my students who pointed that out, that we could scale inside an empty game object, and or use that empty game object as effectively a pivot point. So now my pivot is more or less set. I could fine tune that, but for the sake of the demo, I'll just kind of move this over. And I'll eyeball that and make sure that's the position that I want to be in. And now when I take that X scale down, it scales down to 0. Now it does float a little bit, and that's because I don't have it perfectly registered, but I'll correct for that in just a minute. The other thing that I need to correct for, which looks kind of strange right now, is that if you remember, the bar, the width of this bar, originally I had it set to 3, but once I threw this health bar inside, so the size of it is set to 3 currently, and so when I look at the scale of this, it's at 0.33 or 33%. So the minute that we take a cube, I'll just take another cube here and demonstrate this. Once I take this cube and I throw that cube, make it a child of another object, this cube originally had a size of 1, but because this object is scaled, this bad guy has been scaled up, its scale of 1 now, if I set the X, Y, and Z all to 1, its 1 scale is the same size as the cube. So it actually inherits, the scale becomes much bigger. And so what I want to do is I want to go back into my health bar. I'm going to set the X value to 1. I'm going to leave the other values just the same, or I can change them if I need to. And I'll go back to my health bar manager object, that empty game object, and I'll scale that back up to 1. So its X is now scaled up to 1. So I got a little bit of a glitch. I want to go back in and correct a few things. You can see that my health bar is still registered here, but this guy is in the wrong position, so I'll just kind of slide that back. And now when I look back at the health bar, I can see that position is right where I want it. Now, this time around, when I scale down the X value, you can see that it goes from 1, and ultimately I'll take it down to 0. And that will be the scale for health. So I can make that look a little bit prettier, but for the sake of the demo, this is exactly what I want. So I have this health bar manager. This is the thing that I'm going to scale, and this is the thing that I'm going to read the enemy health variable, that enemy health float variable. This is the thing that I want to interpret it. And so let's just jump right into that. So I need a real simple machine here. I'll just add a state machine. And the first state machine, in fact, the first state, fairly simple. This state, I'll call this scale health bar. So its only job is to interpret the enemy health float value and translate that to a scale. So what we'll do, the first thing that we need to do is we need to get an FSM variable. So let me just take a look in here. Here's a get FSM float. And so what I can do is, rather than look at the owner, I don't want to get the variable that's attached to this owner. I want to specify a game object, and the game object that owns this variable that I'm looking for is bad guy. So I'll drag bad guy in here, and once I do that, you'll see in this little drop-down menu here, there's the FSM bad guy health. That's the owner of the variable that I'm looking for. And once I have that selected, I should be able to hit this little drop-down menu. There we go. There's enemy health. So that was not a global variable. I'm reading that from the FSM that's attached to the bad guy. That's the one that contains. So that's just a local variable. I'm reaching into that state machine and grabbing that variable from there. We'll ultimately, we might want to store this value, but for now, all we want to do is just read this. That's probably not true. Let me just store this. So this is, I'll call this, this is local health. And we'll add that as a float. I think that I'll want to use this right off the bat. So let me store that in local health. I'll want to get this every frame. So each time this is constantly looking, so this will be pretty expensive. I can make a pass a little bit later and make this a little bit more efficient based on when it gets hit or when health is reduced. We can have this make a pass and interpret what its health is and apply that. But for now, to get this demonstration up and running, we'll just do in every frame. So the next thing that we'll need is, ultimately we're going to need some in-between mechanism here to scale down our value of health, because currently our health is equal anywhere from 0 up to 100. If you remember, we'll go back into our bad guy here. I'll take a look at the variables, and you see that I have this enemy health, and its current value is 100. And so what I want to do is I want to take that value and apply it to the scale of health. And so what I can do is if I go into transform, is it transform? Should be transform. There it is. Set scale. What I want to do is I want to set the owner, remember, because we're using the health manager bar object. That's the thing that ultimately we want to scale. We scale that down, it's going to get smaller. Okay, so I'm going to set scale of the owner, and I want to set the X value. For now, we'll do local scale, and what you'll see is that this local scale value is going to jump way out to 100. It's going to be huge. When we hit the play button, that's going to be just an enormous, it runs way off the screen there. Okay, definitely not what we want. But at least it's interpreting that value. And in fact, I can test this a little bit further, that while I'm looking at this, we know that our bullets are reducing health. And so eventually at some point, let's try that again. Eventually at some point, it's not reducing. You know what I think I forgot to do? Let me jump back in health. I want to set that scale, but I also want to do it every frame. Make sure that's in every frame. That way it's constantly looking to see what the value of health is. There it goes. Okay. So it eventually scales down, but the scale's all kind of crazy and out of whack. And so we're going to need to correct for that. And so what we want to do is that we want the value of health that operates from 0 to 100. We want that to be at 1/100th of the scale. So in other words, we want health to be from 0 to 1. And so what we can do is we should just be able to do a little simple math here. We'll take a float and we'll multiply that. Let me just bump this up between the set scale. So we'll take the float value of local scale. We'll multiply that by 0.01. We'll do that every frame. So every frame we're constantly checking and constantly multiplying. Again, that's not going to be very efficient, but we'll get this demo to work, and then there's ways to streamline this. So we're multiplying that by 0.01. We're then going to use that value to set the local scale. So now when I hit play, with any luck, we're going to have a reasonable width there. So we're taking the value of 100. We're multiplying that by 0.1. And so if we were to take 100 and we multiply that by 0.01, we end up with 1. If we take, let's say we have a current value of, let's say our health is 80%, or excuse me, 80. And we multiply that by 0.01, we get 0.8, which is exactly the scale that we want to play with here. So if everything is working properly, there we go. As I'm attacking my player character, the health is getting reduced, and it's registering that on the health bar. So that's a real simple implementation of taking our value of health and translating that to a simple health bar that is managed. It has a certain number of hit points. Now there are ways to make this more efficient, and there are ways to make this look, we can dress this up and do a lot of different things with it. We could also translate that to a 3D text element. So it doesn't have to be a bar that scales down, but that seems to be a pretty common implementation. So that should get you up and running with translating that health float to store it, to detect whether or not it's being hit by a projectile that should reduce damage. In the next presentation, we'll just do a real quick pass, do a little bit of cleanup, and take this just push it one step further. We'll do that in the next presentation.